And this is another knitting journal from your knitting friend in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Today is May 15, 2024. I am definitely a much more mature person than when I started recording these podcasts. So I hope you're not jumping from the first episode to this one. In any case, I'm really happy that you're watching, even if you are jumping from the first episode to this one. And yeah, thank you very much for spending some of your knitting time with me. I am going to be talking about my works in progress, some finished objects I have for today. Where do I start? Maybe I'll have to show you some finished objects like this guy here that I'm really happy about. If you watched last journal, I was talking about this sweater that I was almost finished with, and I was slightly scared of the blocking process, but it is finished. I redid all the things that I mentioned that I needed to redo, and I also blocked the sweater, and it turned out really well with the appropriate measurement. So I am going to write the pattern this week, and it will be ready hopefully in a few weeks. I hope so. It turned out really well, and I will tell you all about it when I launch the pattern so that you can go and knit one if you want. But that is my first finished object for the day. It's Mabel's Pullover, and it's worked with fingering weight yarn, Studio Sock by Neighborhood Fiber Company in the colorway Olive. Okay, what else? I mentioned last journal that I wanted to start knitting a little bit more for my own enjoyment, to respect the time that I need to process different patterns and maybe revisit some older patterns. But especially I talked about honoring my hobby and treating it not only as a work craft, but also as an activity that brings me joy and peace and calm, which is something that I have been needing quite a lot, especially in the last couple of weeks, for different reasons, for all sorts of reasons. I've been under a lot of stress and not terrible things, but upsetting things. And so I really depended on my knitting, and I was happy that I had already been creating this space where I didn't feel guilty knitting just for myself. And I know it doesn't make sense. We should all knit for ourselves, but sometimes you know how our brains can make us feel guilty about many things. Just silly. So I also, I mentioned that I wanted to revisit some older patterns. I actually haven't tried this on after I blocked it, but I took the TROMSØ hat. It's a pattern of mine, and I used the yarn that I showed in previous episode, which is Copper Corgi. It's Copper Corgi Jones Street worsted in the colorway DuBonnet. So the TROMSØ hat is designed to be a bit larger, so a little bit bulkier with more space, but I also wanted to use just one skein of yarn. It's supposed to be deeper, but I also wanted to use just one skein of yarn to save another skein for either mittens or maybe like a neck warmer or cowl, or Maybe I can make another beanie for someone else who likes this color. Whenever I was knitting with it, everyone commented that it was a nice color. I agree. I think red is a color that suits most complexions. So yeah, so this is the TROMSØ hat. It was published last year and it's today's featured pattern. It's really easy pattern. It's very beginner friendly. So it's a basic rib beanie, but there's just this cute like fold over sort of paperback kind of finishing at the top, and you can wear it like this, or you can wear it like this, I suppose. Also, I don't know. Okay, I really like the yarn. The yarn is very special. As I said, I don't know that this yarn is being made anymore. I should have another skein of it to talk about it. This is John Street worsted in DuBonnet by Copper Corgi Yarns in Savannah, Georgia. And this is 60% merino, 30% alpaca, 10% silk, and it's 210 yards for 115 gram skein. So it's a worsted. I used a 4mm needle. That is a US 6 needle, if you prefer that kind of measurement. Because I like my beanies to be on the denser side, maybe not as dense as a sock, but I want the fabric to be fitting around my head and not too loose. And also I like the extra warmth that tighter fabric provides. So this is my other project. I actually knitted and walked with it as I went. I put it in my Joji & Co. fanny pack and I was knitting and walking the dog. And I found out, I didn't find out, but I sort of acknowledged that I need a project that is simple enough when I'm walking and going, that it's small enough and that it won't keep growing, because okay, I could work on the beginning of a sweater, but then it's going to become larger and I probably will run out of project soon. And also if it's a sweater, I have to think of maybe increases, and I really can't concentrate on doing anything when I'm walking, because I am walking, I am also listening to an audiobook, and I am also watching my dog, and who is most of the time off the leash. So Perry, my dog, she's very well behaved, and even though we adopted her about a year and a half ago, she was a stray dog and she was not used to traffic. She would just walk on the street, wherever she wanted, she would just go. When we moved her into the city, I took a very long time, not training her, but walking with her, showing her the way. I was always scared that Perry could get scared and she would run away from me even if she was on the leash. So I made sure that she knew the way back to our place, so I kept walking in the same path over and over, and then I started changing it, and she was always on the leash until maybe 6 months into living with us in the city. I realized that, well, at first I would get her off the leash when we go to the park. So it's a gated park and she doesn't really want to run away with me. She's always next to me, but I never know, dogs can be unpredictable. So it wasn't until I was really sure that she wouldn't be distance from me that I started getting her off the leash. So first we did it in the park, and so I would walk and she would constantly run away a little bit, and then I could see that there was this feedback, constant feedback, that she was constantly looking for me, and I could make myself visible so she would return, and I rewarded her. And so this evolved in that one day I started getting her off the leash because I had taught her how to wait for me and not cross the street unless there was a direct order to do so. So yeah, Perry walks, even though we live in a very busy city, Perry can walk off the leash unless it's a street where there are too many distractions and I don't feel confident controlling her. So this is all to say, I walk, I knit, I listen to a book, and I also look after my dog at the same time. So as I don't do all of those things all the time, but when I do knit, I want it to be something really simple. So the TROMSØ hat was actually the perfect project for that. And also I used to knit socks, really easy ones, ribbed ones for my son, but I also realized that I was not enjoying the movement of the tiny needles and the tiny stitches when I am walking, because I feel like I need to have more control on the yarn when it's so fine and the stitches are so small. So I think that right now this is the perfect project for me to work on. And maybe a week ago, or maybe a little bit more, because I finished this soon after I recorded the previous journal. I was knitting on this at home, and we had friends over for dinner, and my friend Gerard, he looked at this and said, "Oh, are you making one for me?" So I said, "No, this one's for me, but next one I am going to make one for you." So moving on to works in progress, I am working a hat for Gerard. I don't know that it's going to be a TROMSØ hat, because even I don't think that this is a very feminine feature, but I do think that most non-knitting males, or males who don't belong to a knitter family, they prefer something that is more traditional. So more like a traditional crown with decreases. So I think that's what I'm going to do. For the red hat, I modified the pattern. I don't remember what the pattern calls for. The pattern is designed for a thicker yarn. So for this sample, I use 110 stitches, and as you can see, it's very loose around my head. I have a big head for a woman. I have a 24-inch head circumference, maybe like quarter-inch less than that, but more or less. And yeah, so it's a good size for him. But I also wanted it a little bit snugger, a little bit more snug on his head. So I went down to 106 stitches for his ribbed beanie. I think it's working out well for a man's head circumference. My head circumference is bigger than my husband's. My children inherited my head circumference, so their heads are big. They have big heads. But let me grab another skein of the yarn that I use for Gerard. I think it's this one. No, I don't think that I have the tag of what I'm using. I think that I had tagged this on Ravelry. But it is do you remember when Madelinetosh used to have the 80-10-10 basis? So it's 80% merino, 10% nylon, 10% cashmere. So that's the 80-10-10. And if I remember correctly, this is Dirty Panther colorway. Dirty Panther. And I used this yarn in 2015 when I released a pattern collection called the authentic collection, there was a coat there, a knitted coat called Big Old Coat, that some of you might remember, the Big Old Coat. And this was the yarn that I used for that coat, and I had 2 skeins left over, so I am making a simple red beanie for my friend Gerard. And I haven't been working with this one much, but I have been knitting during meetings and therapy sessions or coaching sessions, and I could even be knitting right now, except that I will be showing you some more knitwear. So that is work in progress number 1. And then the other only work in progress I have is one that I showed you last time, but it has now become more like a thing. I think last time I showed you I was in between, like in the middle of a row, and now I can show you a little bit better what I am doing. So this is a long-term project, I would say, because it's some brioche and some garter stitch in fingering weight yarn, so it's taking time. I am using Solo Fingering by Magpie Fibers, and the lights that I'm using are not allowing me to show the colors very properly, but I think that it's good that I have these lights, because then I don't depend on good weather to record, and if you don't mind, then I don't mind. Yeah, so I'm using these 3 colors. They are Stag Bunny, Bougie Beaver, and Bad and Bougie. So, and they are like a rosy natural, a blush, and reddish, like a redwood colorway. And this is not going to be long. This is going to be slight, not cropped, but like maybe waist length, because I don't have a lot of yarn. Let's see, I currently have this much left from the white and the brown, and then I have this left of the blush and another skein of the blush. So I might use all the colors on the body and then do the sleeves in monochrome, which is not an option that I hate. I actually think that I like it. I am going to use the blush for all the trimmings, but if I do have enough, then I'll do some amounts of brioche down the sleeves, but I might have to do like a longer section in the blush, just because this is the color that I have more of. But it's okay. You know that a lot of my designs are born that way. 99.9% of my designs come from my stash, and sometimes I have an idea that requires more yarn than I have, so I have to be creative. And I love to talk about that with all of my knitters. I work with a lot of really beautiful yarn, and I have really beautiful yarn here behind me, but I try to remember what I have. I try to regularly go through my stash and reorganize it and get familiar with it again, so that I can make the most of it and not just get new yarn. Like right now, this episode, I have 0 new yarns coming into my house, and I've been diligently knitting. So yeah, and I'm excited to use a lot of the things that I have right now. Speaking of yarns and talking to students about stash, by the way, that's my last work in progress. I have been teaching last week. I taught a virtual class after a very long time. I hadn't taught virtually since the pandemic. I think last time was in 2020 for Barcelona Knits, but I have been recording here, so it's not like I am not used to talking in public or to people who watch a recording, but I hadn't really been teaching, and I was hired for a yarn store event, and I taught a class which I will be teaching again in other venues, in person and virtually. The class is called Yarn Alchemy, and I talk about a lot of things I consider when choosing yarn for a project, like yarn composition, yarn structure, fiber behavior, and things like that. But I was talking about something, and I thought I would share it here today. I don't know, just because I found two yarns that have very, very similar yardage as an example, and I felt like sharing. So if you watch my journals regularly, you know that I am not married to any of the yarn companies who give me yarn, and I always will give you an honest review. My honest reviews will all be positive because I hate giving a bad review, but that means that if I hated a product, you don't get to see it in my journal. So basically, I just don't talk about something that I don't think it's nice. But yes, and I have also talked about how I often feel like the yarns that I'm using are not properly labeled regarding the yarn weight. So I'm sure it happened to you many times that you purchased a yarn that said sport weight, but then you start working with it and it is just the same weight as any of your fingering weight stash, or even sometimes even finer, or the other way around, you get something labeled as sport weight and it's definitely knitting up at 22 stitches to 4 inches, which is a DK weight, and you're not even using like large needles or anything, right? So I think that many times manufacturers label their yarns according to the yardage per 100 grams, regardless of the wraps per inch, or how actually thick that yarn is. So I was talking about yarn density and how some yarns are more compact, denser, more sleek than other fibers. If you compare mohair, which is very fluffy, with a strand of 100% silk, which is very compact and heavy, then you can sort of visualize what I'm talking about. So I find it a little frustrating when I am designing with a yarn that is labeled as a worsted weight yarn, but then my gauge is maybe 11 to 4 inches. So in Ravelry, you will see that I use whatever yarn, which is labeled as worsted, but then people will go to the yarn store and they will get a worsted weight yarn and it won't match the results that I need for my pattern, if you know what I mean. So I am going to talk about two very concrete examples when that happens. So one of them is Woolfolk yarn. I love you, but the Tage that I used last year for the Cloud Peak cardigan is a merino and mohair blend. And this is labeled as a worsted weight yarn. It's a very fluffy and airy yarn, as you can see. Sorry about my nails, I have an appointment soon. And my gauge for that pattern might have been 14 or 15. I don't remember properly. So the Cloud Peak cardigan was designed for Woolfolk Tage, T-A-G-E. This is the colorway 18. It's a tremendous yarn. I loved it. I really enjoyed the fact that it gave me a super warm garment that weighs nothing, super thick. And but I had to make a big note in the pattern saying, hey, the yarn that I'm using is classified as worsted weight, but it might be substituted by different strands of mohair or a bulky weight yarn, or like make sure that you swatch. Just one second, I'm gonna open the door to my dog. Yeah, so the Tage has a yardage per 100 grams of 317 yards according to their website. So they have 50 gram skeins, and I think they are about 150 something yards per skein. So yeah, about 316-ish yards per 100 gram skein. So if I had to label this guy, depending on the yards per 100 grams, this would be a sport weight. And on the other end of the spectrum, I have the Equinox by Magpie Fibers, which is 65% silk, 35% linen, so super dense fibers. And this is labeled, of course, as a sport, but when I swatch with this yarn, which I don't know if you can see, is really fine and tiny, this gives me a gauge very similar to fingering weight. So if I haven't designed with this yet, it's a lovely yarn and I'm planning design with it soon. But if or when I design with this yarn, I will have to make a note saying, okay, this is labeled as a sport weight yarn, but you can get similar results using fingering weight yarn because of gauge issues. So the yardage for the Equinox, the colorway name, by the way, is Little Bit Bougie, which is a pinky, dusty pink color. Again, it's 365 yards per 115 gram skein, so that is 317 yards per 100 grams. So these two have the same yardage per 100 grams, but they are extremely different because this is an airy yarn and this is a dense yarn. So what I mean is, not to complicate things, but when you go shopping for yarn, you might take a look at the structure of the yarn, figure out if you are substituting the fibers, and maybe consider whether the fiber that you are now using is a much denser than the one the pattern calls for. Also, take a look at not just the classification of the yarn that the designer used, but also take a look at the required gauge, because that will help you assess a lot better your yarn choices and even before having to fully swatch with the new yarn that you got for a design. So that is that. So the class went well. I hope if you were there in the class, I hope that you had a good time. And I will be soon going on a trip where I will be teaching again in person. And I wanted to share a little bit about the trips that I am doing and the classes that I'm teaching both in person and virtually. So my next trip is next week. I am leaving home on Wednesday, and I am traveling via Miami to Seattle. And then on Friday, I am getting on a cruise. So I am joining Tracy and Jody from the Grocery Girls podcast. And I am also joining Tink and Knits as teachers. They are the other instructors. And we're all going on an Alaska cruise with, I think, something like 100 knitters or a little bit under that. I am not sure how many, but I am really looking forward to that. So that is Tracy and Jody's first cruise that they are doing, and it was their first retreat that they announced. After announcing the cruise to Alaska, I think that they had at least one land retreat, but the cruise is really special because for a lot of us, me included, the fact that I get to visit a place like Alaska. I've never been on a cruise before, so I hope that I can manage well. It's very special. So you get to interact with everyone, with so many knitters on board. There's so much time to be together on board. And then I am teaching 3 workshops, which is basically the same workshop. I'm just teaching it to the 3 different groups. And then my husband is coming with me, so that is a really plus, because I get to share my first time in Alaska, my first time on a cruise with my husband. So if I get sick, he can take care of me, and I can take care of him if he gets sick, of course, if he gets sick. But yeah. So I am leaving next week. Unfortunately, that cruise sold out really quickly. As soon as Tracy and Jody announced that they were starting to do cruises, a lot of people really wanted to literally jump on board with them. But if you are interested in other cruises that they are doing, they are now offering the East Coast version. So I'm going on the West Coast version, sailing from Seattle to Alaska and then back to Seattle. And they are now offering the East Coast version, where they are sailing from Massachusetts. I don't know where the departure is from. I think that they're visiting, I don't know. I'm gonna say something wrong, but they are leaving from Massachusetts or New York, and they're going north along the East Coast, and they're going along the coast of Maine, and then several shores in Canada, and then back. I think that it's also like a week-long cruise. So it's the sister of the cruise that I am taking part of, and the instructors on that version are Mary Jane Macklestone, who's a great teacher. She specializes in color work, and Lori Lee Beltman, who's a great construction teacher. So that's where I am going to be next week, and I'm really excited about. And I have been thinking that I will document the entire thing and then upload it to YouTube, sort of like, how does a knitting cruise work like, that I can share here. So I hope that's something that you like. And then I will be in 2 other trips that are also sold out. I am going in June to Italy to teach at Mayak Retreat, and this time I am taking my younger son, Sebi. So we are going there in June, and then in August I am taking another cruise, and I think that I already shared this before, because this was sold last year, but I am taking a cruise from New York to Greenland and then Iceland. So I'm working there, and this time I'm going on my own because it was a little bit expensive to take a family member, but and also it's a longer one, so Charlie had to leave our home and our work for too many days. So I am going on that one on my own, which is, I am slightly concerned, but not really, because I know that it's gonna be full of knitters, and every time that I've been surrounded with knitters, I have a really, really amazing time. But I have become spoiled because family members have been with me lately for every trip. I haven't been really traveling solo lately. So it's gonna be, I'm probably going to be homesick sooner than for other trips. The good news is that when I finish that trip in Iceland, I am going to meet up with my friend Vera, who's going to Iceland to meet me, and we are going to go on a girls hiking trip. So lots of knitting time on that cruise, and then lots of hiking with Vera. I guess that's it for today. I do have some plans for things that I want to cast on before leaving on my trip, but I don't have any yarn to show you for that. So I guess I'm going to finish this episode today, and I will try to bring my mother next time. Don't worry. I hope to record before I leave with her. I'm going to ask her if she wants to come and show us what she has been working on. So thank you so much for being here once